Friend's sister falsely claimed I got her pregnant, leading my parents to disown me. Now that the truth's out, they're begging for forgiveness, and I'm not sure they deserve it. Alright, buckle up, because this is one of those stories that still makes me shake my head in disbelief. About a year ago, my life went completely off the rails, and I've got to unload it somewhere. We're better than Reddit, right? You know, when everything just blows up in your face, and you're standing there like, is this really happening to me? So here's how it all went down, and trust me, this is the kind of thing that makes you question reality. My best friend Dave has a sister named Jenny. We all grew up together, same neighborhood, hung out occasionally, nothing out of the ordinary. You know the drill. Small town, close-knit, everybody knows everybody's business. Now Jenny was always a bit different. I'm not trying to be harsh here, but it was common knowledge that she had some mental health issues. It wasn't something people talked about openly, but you could feel it. Dave never really brought it up, and I wasn't about to ask. But we all knew there was something going on. She had her struggles, and everyone seemed to tiptoe around that fact, not wanting to set her off. But that's where the drama kicks in. Because one day, out of nowhere, Jenny decided to tell everyone that me had gotten her pregnant. You can imagine how that bombshell went off. So about a year ago, Jenny hits me up out of the blue and drops this bombshell. She's pregnant. Alright, cool, people get pregnant, life happens, right? Except for one huge problem. She tells me I'm the father. And I swear, my brain hit the brakes so hard I thought I was having a stroke. I was like, wait, excuse me, what? Let me make this crystal clear. Never in my life have I been close to Jenny in that way. I've never even given her a high five, let alone anything that could lead to a baby. So for her to just throw this accusation at me, I couldn't wrap my head around it. I told her straight up, Jenny, I don't know what kind of fantasy world you're living in, but there's absolutely no way I'm the father. We've never been anything more than acquaintances at best. But she just kept doubling down, repeating it like if she said it enough times, I'd suddenly remember this imaginary night that never happened. At that point, I wasn't just confused, I was furious. It was like she was trying to rewrite history and drag me into this lie, and for what? It was surreal, to say the least. I tried to stay calm, telling myself maybe this was part of Jenny's mental health struggles. But deep down, I was freaking out. I mean, how do you even process something like this? Now here's where things really start going off the rails. Jenny flat out refuses to take a prenatal paternity test. I'm sitting there like, wait, if you're so sure it's my kid, wouldn't you want to take the test and settle this? But nope, she was digging her heels in, saying stuff like, you need to step up for your child. You're already abandoning us, and the baby's not even here yet. It was like a one-way ticket to Guilt Trip City, and I was having none of it. I laid it out clear as day. If you're not going to take the test, I'm not signing a thing. I wasn't about to get legally trapped in some crazy situation with a kid that wasn't mine. Seems simple, right? Problem solved? Huh. Not even close. Enter the family drama. My parents, who I thought would be on my side, totally flip. Jenny goes running to them, crying about how I'm abandoning her and the baby, and next thing I know, my folks are looking at me like I'm the villain in this soap opera. A few weeks later, my parents find out. Now, don't get me wrong. I love my parents, but they've always had this whole traditional family values mindset. So, the second they hear about Jenny's claim, they absolutely lose it. Like, full meltdown mode. They start calling me a disgrace, a deadbeat, and every other name in the book. Meanwhile, I'm just standing there, trying to get a word in edgewise, but they're not having it. I tried to explain, Mom, Dad, this isn't my kid. Jenny's just making this up. But nope, they weren't hearing it. The moment they got it in their heads that I was supposedly responsible, it was like their logic switch got flipped off. In their eyes, I was already guilty, and no amount of reasoning was going to change that. What followed was a series of brutal arguments. Things got nasty. Stuff was said that I can't ever take back. And honestly, I'm still furious about it. My parents just kept hammering me to do the right thing and step up as a father. I told them over and over that this wasn't my kid, but it didn't matter. They had already decided that I was some sort of lowlife who was abandoning his responsibilities. They told me they didn't raise me to be a deadbeat dad, and they couldn't believe I would deny my own child. Meanwhile, I'm standing there like, I don't even have a child. It didn't matter though. Once the idea was in their heads, there was no shaking it. And just like that, everything spiraled out of control. Here's where things get even more ridiculous. I wasn't even in the same state when Jenny supposedly got pregnant. That's right. She was staying at a friend's place for a whole month during the time she claimed she conceived. I brought this up to my parents, thinking it would finally get through to them, but they just brushed it off like it was no big deal. People make mistakes, they said. Mistakes? This wasn't just some innocent mistake. This was a full-blown accusation that could ruin my entire life. But apparently, that little detail didn't faze them. Fast forward to about 6 months into Jenny's pregnancy, and by this point, the entire family had turned against me. Every family dinner, every phone call, every text message, everything revolved around how I needed to man up and take responsibility for this baby that wasn't even mine. It was like I'd been cast as the villain in a story I didn't even write. I was losing my mind. It felt like I was living in a bad dream, and no matter what I said or did, nobody would believe me. My friends were mostly on my side, but even a couple of them started throwing in their doubts, saying stuff like, "Are you sure, man? Maybe you just don't remember something?" And I'm over here like, what is there to remember? I never slept with her. But somehow the more I protested, the guiltier I looked. Finally, my parents hit me with the ultimate threat. If I didn't step up and act like a father to Jenny's baby, they were going to cut me out of their lives. Disown me. Kick me to the curb, just like that. At first, I thought they were bluffing. No way they'd actually follow through, right? But nope, they were dead serious. They straight up told me that if I didn't go along with this lie, I was no longer welcome in the family. And sure enough, when I didn't cave to the pressure, they disowned me. My own parents. Let me tell you, that hit hard. I was furious, confused, and honestly just devastated. These were the people who were supposed to have my back, and they chose to believe someone else's wild accusation over their own son. It felt like I didn't even matter to them anymore. They tossed me aside like I was nothing, all because of some made-up story. It was brutal. And then, things got even stranger after the baby was born. My mom was at the hospital, playing the role of proud grandma, while I wasn't even in the loop. I found out later, after the fact. And even then, Jenny still wouldn't take a paternity test. So I had to go through the legal system just to get it done. When the results finally came in, guess what? 0% chance. I was the father, not even close. I held that paper in my hand, and I felt this huge mix of relief and pure rage. I sent the results to my parents, thinking, okay, now they'll see the truth. Now they'll realize they were wrong, and maybe, just maybe, we can start fixing this mess. But did they? Oh no, it wasn't that simple. Instead, my phone blew up with apologies, offers of money, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. My dad even mailed me a few $100, like stuffing some cash in an envelope was going to make everything magically okay. Here's the kicker. I kept the money. Yeah, I took it. Honestly, after everything they put me through, I felt like they owed me that and more. But forgiving them? Absolutely not. I told them straight up, if they were willing to disown me over some baseless accusation, there was no way I was going to risk opening myself up to that kind of betrayal again. Most of my friends backed me up, but a few, along with my therapist, started suggesting, maybe you should give them another chance. They're still your parents after all. And I get it. Really, I do. But how are you supposed to forgive people who were ready to toss you aside like garbage based on a complete lie? How do you trust someone who believed a stranger over their own child? That's where I'm stuck right now. I know I did nothing wrong, and yet I'm constantly wondering if I should bother trying to fix things with my family. But every time I think about it, I remember how fast they turned on me, like flipping a switch, and I can't shake that gut-wrenching feeling that they abandoned me when I needed them the most. And here's the thing. After all the chaos with Jenny's baby drama, you'd think things would settle down, right? Nope. If anything, the drama train just kept on rolling. Nope. Life had other plans for me. If anything, the whole mess just kept spiraling out of control. You'd think proving I wasn't the father would have wrapped things up nicely, but man, I wish it had been that simple. Turns out, when people don't want to admit they screwed up, they'll do anything to dodge responsibility. So after the paternity test came back and officially proved I wasn't the dad, I thought, all right, this is it. My parents will finally realize they were wrong and we can get back to some semblance of normal. But instead of the relief I expected, things got 10 times messier. First off, Jenny completely lost it. Lost it. She started telling everyone around town that I had faked the paternity test results or somehow tampered with them. Yep, you read that right. In her mind, I had orchestrated some grand conspiracy, convincing a whole laboratory to rig a DNA test in my favor. What? How on earth would I even do that? I'm just a regular guy, not some evil genius with connections in forensic labs. But Jenny wasn't having any of it. She was completely dead set on painting me as the villain in her twisted narrative. She went around spreading rumors that I was abandoning her and the baby, telling everyone that I'd tricked the system to get out of my responsibility. It was absolute madness. And the worst part? Some people actually believed her. Instead of seeing the truth, they started wondering if maybe I had done something shady. It was like the more absurd the story, it didn't make any sense, but it didn't matter. People started to believe her. Small-town rumors spread like wildfire, and before I knew it, I had folks shooting me dirty looks at the grocery store, like I was some kind of deadbeat scumbag. I even had people confront me, right there in public, demanding to know why I wasn't stepping up to take care of my kid. It was absolutely infuriating. I had the paternity test results right in my hands. Cold, hard proof that I wasn't the father, but no one seemed to care. Jenny was out there playing the ultimate victim, spinning her story to whoever would listen, and somehow I was the one getting dragged through the mud for something I didn't even do. I've never felt so helpless in my entire life. It's one thing when your family turns on you, but when the whole town starts thinking you're the bad guy, that's a whole new level of betrayal. It hits different when everyone around you starts treating you like a pariah, like you're walking around with a scarlet letter on your chest for something you didn't even do. And my parents, well, they were still trying to smooth things over like nothing had happened, like throwing me under the bus for months was something we could just sweep under the rug. They didn't know how to handle it either, but instead of taking a hard stance, they were stuck in the middle. They're trying to play nice with everyone, except, their own son. My mom kept calling, leaving these long, emotional voicemails talking about how she just wanted her family back together again. But here's the kicker. She didn't even address what had happened. Not one word about the accusations, the betrayal, or how they turned their backs on me. No, she just wanted to sweep it all under the rug, like it was some awkward dinner conversation we could all pretend never happened. She even had the nerve to suggest I come over for dinner, as if a casserole and some small talk could magically fix all the damage they'd done. It wasn't just awkward, it was downright insulting. After all the crap they put me through, they really thought a couple of forced family dinners and some fake smiles were going to make it all okay? No apology, no real acknowledgement of how they'd completely wrecked our relationship. Just a casual, let's move on. It was like they had no idea how deeply they'd shattered the trust we had. And that's the thing. Once trust is broken like that, you can't just slap a band-aid on it with a meal and a hug. It takes real effort, real work to rebuild that kind of trust. But instead of doing that, they couldn't even admit they were wrong. It was like they were in denial, pretending everything could just go back to normal because they were ready for it. The cherry on top was when my dad decided to bribe me. No joke, he sent me an email offering to buy me a new car if I would come back to the family, like I was some kid being coaxed back into behaving with shiny toys. It was honestly embarrassing and just made it clear that they still didn't get it. Like, what? Did they really think they could just buy my forgiveness? It was so far removed from reality that I just sat there, staring at the email, wondering if this was some kind of twisted prank. But no, my dad was completely serious. I didn't even know how to respond. I just sat there, dumbfounded. What do you even say to something like that? The whole thing made it crystal clear. They didn't actually care about fixing things the right way. They just wanted me back in their lives because it was convenient for them. And the fact that they thought throwing money at me would patch everything up? It hit me like a ton of bricks. They really had no idea what they'd done or how deeply they'd hurt me. But as ridiculous as that was, the worst part came later. That's when I found out Jenny had gone to a whole new level of crazy. She started reaching out to people I knew, trying to drag them into her web of lies. The real low point? She even contacted my ex-girlfriend, Samantha, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, and tried to convince her that I was this awful person who had abandoned his kid. I didn't even know Jenny knew Sam existed, but there I was, out of the blue, getting a text from my ex that just said, "We need to talk." My heart sank. I couldn't believe it. Jenny was out there spreading lies, trying to tear down whatever little piece I had left, and now she was dragging people from my past into her mess. At first, I had no idea what Samantha was talking about. But when she explained that Jenny had been messaging her, trying to dig up old drama and paint me as this deadbeat dad, I just about lost it. I immediately called Jenny, ready to put an end to this madness. I told her to stop, that I was done with her games, her lies, and that she needed to leave my friends and exes out of her twisted mess. But you know what she did? She laughed, actually laughed, and then hung up on me. It was like talking to a brick wall. She was so deep in her fantasy world that nothing I said even registered. At that point, I seriously started considering getting a lawyer involved. I didn't want it to go that far, but what other choice did I have? Jenny was out here single-handedly wrecking my reputation, and my parents, oh, they were still enabling her every step of the way. I felt completely alone, even though my closest friends were on my side. But even they didn't know the full extent of how bad this had gotten. They weren't the ones getting harassed, stalked, and lied about on a daily basis. Eventually, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't keep living in this constant state of stress, waiting for the next rumor to spread or the next wild accusation to blindside me. I realized I had to make a choice for my own sanity. I decided to cut ties completely. Not just with Jenny, but with my parents too. It was brutal, but I couldn't keep holding on to relationships that were destroying me from the inside out. It wasn't easy. In fact, it sucked, but I knew I couldn't keep letting them drag me down any longer. So, I wrote my parents a long, brutally honest email, laying everything out. I told them how betrayed I felt, how they'd failed me when I needed them most, and how I couldn't trust them anymore. I didn't sugarcoat a thing. I told them straight up that I wasn't ready to forgive them, and frankly, I wasn't sure if I ever would be. If they wanted any chance of a relationship with me in the future, they needed to start by actually apologizing and taking responsibility for what they'd done. No more pretending everything was fine. No more sweeping this massive betrayal under the rug like it never happened. As for Jenny, I blocked her on every platform imaginable. I couldn't deal with her manipulations anymore. She wasn't my problem, and I wasn't about to let her keep pulling me into her web of lies. I even had to sit down with Dave, her brother, and tell him I couldn't be around his family for a while. That part hit hard. Dave's always been a solid friend, but I had to put my own well-being first. And that meant stepping back, even if it sucked. The reality was, his sister had dragged me through hell, and my mental health was on the line. It wasn't just about cutting out toxic family members, it was about surviving the constant emotional strain they'd put me under. It's been a few months since I cut them off. And honestly, it's been a relief. Sure, there are days where I feel a pang of guilt or start second-guessing myself, but overall, I know I made the right call. Sometimes you have to walk away, even when it hurts. I have no idea what the future holds for me and my parents. Maybe one day they'll wake up, realize what they did, and apologize for real. Or maybe they won't. Either way, I'm done letting them control my life. I've got my own path now, and for the first time in a long time, I'm walking it on my terms. Update 2. Alright, here's where things take a wild turn. After I finally got the restraining order on Jenny and started focusing on rebuilding my life, I thought, naively of course, that things would finally calm down. But no. Life had other plans. Just when I was starting to feel like I could breathe again, my parents found a new way to mess with me. And this time, it wasn't direct contact. No vandalizing my car, no desperate emails. Nope, this was on a whole different level of messed up. Instead of confronting me head-on, they decided to wage some kind of covert smear campaign. I started hearing from old family friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, telling me my parents had been going around spreading lies, saying I was ungrateful, selfish, and abandoning my family for no good reason. It was like they couldn't deal with the fact that I'd set boundaries, so they had to turn me into the bad guy in everyone else's eyes. So one day I'm sitting at home, minding my own business, when I get this letter in the mail. Nothing unusual, right? Just another piece of mail. Except this one's from a lawyer. My first thought, it had to be something related to the restraining order, maybe some final paperwork or something. But no, it was a lawsuit. And not just any lawsuit, my own parents were suing me. For what, you ask? Emotional distress. That's right. My parents were actually suing me because I cut them off, claiming that my decision caused them severe emotional damage, and that they were entitled to financial compensation. I couldn't believe what I was reading. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? But no, they were serious. They even had the nerve to claim I had alienated them from the rest of the family, like I was the one who isolated them when, in reality, they were the ones who'd isolated me. I sat there for what felt like an eternity just staring at the letter, trying to wrap my head around it. I mean, who does that? Who sues their own kid because they got cut off for toxic behavior? It was so absurd. It was almost laughable. Except it was real, and it was happening to me. I didn't even know what to do at first. Part of me wanted to laugh at how completely ridiculous the whole situation was, but the other part of me was seriously stressed out. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was legal, and it was about to get real messy. I called my lawyer immediately, because there was no way I was dealing with this alone. When I told her what was going on, she was just as stunned as I was. She'd seen her fair share of messy family disputes, but parents suing their own kid for emotional distress? That was new, even for her. We went through the lawsuit, and while most of it was clearly baseless and absurd, we both knew we couldn't just brush it off. They were dead serious, and that meant I had no choice but to fight back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of stress, meetings, and endless phone calls. I had to pull together every piece of evidence I could, the paternity test results, the restraining order, and all the harassment I'd been subjected to. The more I dug through everything, the more surreal it felt that it had come to this. My lawyer was confident we had a strong case and could win, but the fact that it had come to this point? My own parents, trying to drag me through court, ruining my reputation just because I finally stood up to them? It felt like they weren't just trying to control me anymore, they wanted to break me. But here's the thing, they didn't just stop at the lawsuit. Oh no, they had to take it a step further and make everything even worse. They started reaching out to other family members, trying to rally them against me. Out of nowhere, I started getting bombarded with messages from aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't heard from in years. And they were all parroting the same nonsense. Why can't you just make peace with your parents? Or, family is everything. You're being selfish. It was like my parents had successfully brainwashed them into thinking I was the villain in all of this. I was beyond furious, not just at my parents, but at the entire situation. It felt like no matter how hard I tried to protect myself, they always found a way to twist the story and make me look like the bad guy. I mean, how do you even begin to explain to someone who's only hearing their side of the story that your parents are suing you for emotional distress simply because you enforced boundaries? It got so bad that I had to cut off even more people. I blocked family members, unfriended people on social media, and essentially shut down any connection to that side of my life. I couldn't handle their constant guilt trips and unsolicited advice about fixing things when they had no idea what was really going on. It wasn't just exhausting, it was infuriating. The more I tried to set boundaries, the more my parents twisted the narrative and turned everyone against me. It wasn't because I didn't care about them. I did. But I couldn't keep explaining myself over and over to people who had already made up their minds. It was draining, and I was done justifying my decisions to people who refused to see the bigger picture. I couldn't keep playing the game where they guilt me into compliance. Not after everything I'd been through. Eventually, the court date rolled around. I showed up with my lawyer, ready for whatever absurd nonsense they were about to throw my way. And let me tell you, it was a complete circus. My parents came in with this whole sob story lined up about how they had always been there for me, how they'd done everything they could to help me through tough times, and how I had cruelly cut them off without reason. It was honestly impressive, the level of victimhood they managed to manufacture, considering they were the ones who disowned me in the first place. But my lawyer? She wasn't having any of it. She systematically tore their arguments to shreds, piece by piece, laying out all the evidence, the harassment, the restraining order, the paternity test, everything. Every time they tried to play the poor us card, my lawyer came back with cold, hard facts that completely dismantled their story. It was brutal to watch. By the end, you could see the judge wasn't buying their act for a second. They had come in expecting sympathy, but by the time the truth was laid bare, they were left looking like exactly what they were. People trying to manipulate the system to punish me for setting boundaries. The judge ruled in my favor. Obviously, the lawsuit was thrown out, and my parents were even ordered to pay my legal fees. Which, sure, felt like a small victory. But honestly, it didn't feel like a win. It felt more like I had just barely crawled out of a nightmare, and there was still so much damage left to deal with. After the case, they tried one final, desperate move to worm their way back into my life. They sent me this long, emotional letter about how they were sorry for everything, how they just wanted to make things right, and how they couldn't bear the thought of losing me. Same old story. Same manipulative, guilt-tripping tactics they'd been using since this mess started. And honestly, I didn't even bother responding. My decision had already been made. I wasn't going back. There's only so much someone can take before they hit their breaking point and realize they have to walk away for good. Yeah, it hurt. I'm not going to pretend cutting off your own family is easy. No matter how toxic things get, there's still that emotional tie. but sometimes it's necessary for your own mental health. I couldn't keep letting them drag me back into their chaos, no matter how much they claimed to love me. Their version of love was toxic, manipulative, and suffocating, and I wasn't gonna let it poison my life anymore. So, that's where I'm at now. The lawsuit is finally behind me. The restraining orders are still firmly in place, and I'm moving forward with my life, away from all the madness. It hasn't been easy, but I'm learning how to live without all the noise, without the constant, looming stress of wondering when the next disaster is going to hit. For the first time in years, I actually feel like I've got control over my life again. And let me tell you, that feels pretty damn good. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day things will change with my family, maybe they won't. But honestly, right now, I'm focused on me, on rebuilding the parts of my life they tried so hard to tear down, on reclaiming my own sanity after years of being dragged into their toxic whirlwind. It's been a long road, longer and more painful than I ever could have imagined. But I'm finally starting to see the light at the end of this nightmare of a tunnel. Update 3. And just when I thought things might actually calm down, guess who decided to try and stir the pot again? Alright, so if you've been following along, you'd probably think that after the lawsuit, the restraining order, and all the family drama, things would finally calm down, that the madness would be over. But nope, my family still found a way to surprise me, one last time. And honestly, this one left me shaking my head because I didn't think they could possibly sink any lower. Yet, here we are. A couple of months after the court ruled in my favor, things finally seemed to be settling down. I had cut ties with everyone who was bringing stress into my life, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was actually focusing on rebuilding. No random calls from distant relatives, no legal threats, no drama. Just peace. Or so I thought. One day, I'm out running errands, doing normal stuff like grabbing groceries, when I bump into my cousin Melissa. Now, Melissa and I hadn't really talked much throughout this whole disaster. We weren't particularly close growing up, but we'd always gotten along just fine. So when I saw her, I figured, why not say hi? What's the harm in catching up for a minute? Little did I know, Melissa had news for me. She casually drops this bombshell about how my parents had been telling everyone in the family that I was going through some kind of mental breakdown, and that's why I had cut them off. Oh, and that I'd made up the entire lawsuit, the restraining order, everything, just for attention. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had the court documents, the restraining order, all the proof, but somehow, I was the one being painted as mentally unstable? I stood there, staring at her, trying to process how my family had managed to twist the truth even further. We ended up chatting for a bit, just catching up on the usual stuff, life, work, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, out of nowhere, Melissa drops this bomb on me. Hey, did you hear what your parents are planning? I froze. Planning? I asked, that familiar pit in my stomach starting to churn. Melissa hesitated, clearly unsure whether she should even be telling me, but then she sighed and went on. Yeah, they're organizing a big family reunion next month. Apparently, they've been telling everyone that it's supposed to be a reconciliation thing between you and them. I stood there in shock. Seriously? After everything, they were planning some kind of ambush reunion to try and force me back into the family fold? They couldn't just leave things alone. They had to try and manipulate the situation yet again, dragging the whole extended family into it like that would magically fix everything. It was so on brand for them, though. Instead of a real apology or any kind of effort to make things right, they were going to pull some staged, emotional reunion and try to guilt me into forgiving them in front of everyone. And the worst part? They were probably spinning it as some heartwarming gesture, framing themselves as the ones trying to heal the family, when in reality, it was just another way to control the narrative and put me on the spot. I pressed Melissa for more details, and it turns out my parents were going all out. They'd invited everyone, distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, old family friends, people who barely even knew what was going on. And the kicker? They'd been telling everyone that I would be there, like I was fully on board with this whole charade. I was furious. I hadn't agreed to anything, and now they were setting me up to look like the bad guy if I didn't show up. Another classic move from my parents. Manipulate the situation, make me look like the villain, and guilt-trip me into doing what they wanted. They were staging a whole reunion under the guise of reconciliation, while completely ignoring the fact that they hadn't once taken responsibility for their actions. I thanked Melissa for the heads up and told her straight up that there was no way I was going. She understood, but I could see it in her eyes. She was torn. Part of her was buying into my parents' let's fix things narrative. She wanted me to go, to somehow make things right, but after everything they'd put me through, there was no way I was walking into that trap. It was just another ploy to control the situation. Another public spectacle to make me look like the unreasonable one for not wanting to play nice. That night, I went home and thought long and hard about what I should do. I knew there was no way I was going to the reunion, but part of me felt like I couldn't just ignore it either. This wasn't something I could let slide. Again. So I made the decision to send one final message to my parents, laying everything out once and for all. The next morning, I sat down and wrote them an email. It wasn't long, but it was direct. I told them that I knew about the reunion, and I wasn't coming. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in any reconciliation that was being forced on me, especially not in front of a crowd of people who had no idea what really went down. I told them flat out that if they actually cared about fixing things, they needed to start by respecting my boundaries and stop trying to manipulate me. Until they could do that, there was absolutely nothing left for us to talk about. I didn't expect a response, and honestly, I didn't need one. I just needed to set the record straight one last time and walk away knowing that I'd said my piece. This time, on my own terms. If they couldn't accept that, then it was on them, not me. But of course, my parents couldn't just let it go. A few days later, my dad called. I didn't answer, but he left this long, rambling voicemail about how I was tearing the family apart and how this reunion was supposed to be a fresh start for all of us. And then, because of course he did, he tried to guilt-trip me by saying, "Your grandparents would be so disappointed in how you're handling this." That voicemail hit me hard. Not because I believed it, but because it was a perfect reminder of how my parents had always used guilt and manipulation to get their way. They would pull out any card to make me feel like the problem, even if it meant dragging my grandparents, who had always been supportive of me, into their twisted narrative. It was like they couldn't even consider the possibility that they were the ones who needed to take a long, hard look in the mirror. No, in their eyes, it was always me who was in the wrong. I didn't respond to the voicemail. What would have been the point? I had already said my piece in that email, and I wasn't about to let them pull me back into their drama. But just because I didn't respond doesn't mean it didn't weigh on me. It was exhausting, constantly having to defend my boundaries while they kept trying to tear them down, acting like I was the villain for finally standing up for myself. For days after that voicemail, I couldn't stop thinking about the reunion, about all the relatives who would be there, probably thinking I was just being stubborn and refusing to make peace. I kept wondering how many of them knew the full story, or if they were just getting the twisted version my parents were spoon-feeding them. The reunion came and went, and I didn't hear a word from my parents afterward. No surprise there. I saw some photos pop up on Facebook, smiling faces, family hugs, everyone looking like one big happy family. And there were my parents, grinning like they hadn't just spent the last year trying to wreck my life. It was honestly surreal. They were so good at pretending everything was fine, at playing the perfect family, even when their actions were the furthest thing from it. But a few weeks later, I ran into Melissa again, and she gave me the real scoop. Apparently, the reunion had been awkward. A lot of people had expected me to show up, and when I didn't, it led to some pretty uncomfortable conversations. According to Melissa, my parents tried to explain my absence with their usual spin, but this time, it didn't go over so well. Some relatives started questioning why I wasn't there, and why my parents hadn't been more upfront about the whole situation. Turns out, not everyone was blindly buying into their version of events after all. It was strangely satisfying to hear that cracks were starting to show in their story, that people were finally starting to question the narrative my parents had been pushing. Maybe, just maybe, the truth was starting to catch up with them.